In the middle of Nduola City's noise and chaos, Aisha believed marriage was about building a life together, sharing dreams, supporting each other through every storm. She had stood by Kelechi for years, through his struggles, his campaigns, and his moments of doubt. But that morning everything changed. They were arguing, nothing unusual at first, but then his voice turned cold, almost like she was speaking to a stranger. He looked her in the eyes, no hesitation, and said, "You're a loser. I deserve better." The words didn't just hurt, they crushed something deep inside her. She felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. For a second, she couldn't even reply. Memories of all the nights she stayed up sewing his torn shirts, all the time she sold her own designs to pay his debts, flashed through her mind. And now this was what she was worth to him? Just a loser? She stood there, numb, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the traffic outside. In that moment, the man she thought was her partner felt like the cruelest stranger she had ever met. And even though she didn't know it yet, that one sentence would change her life forever. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. In just a few weeks, Kelechi was all over the city with someone new, a young socialite named Nomi. She was barely in her 20s, full of gloss and glamour, with a face that always seemed ready for the next Instagram post. Everywhere Aisha turned, there were pictures on blogs, on social media, even on the entertainment news. The same man who used to hold Aisha's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world now walked proudly with another woman, fingers intertwined, smiling for cameras like love had never lived anywhere else. They were spotted at high-end restaurants, rooftop bars, and charity galas. Nomi wore designer dresses that looked like they had just come off the runway. Her hair was always perfectly styled, her nails freshly painted, her laughter loud enough to make sure everyone knew she was happy. People didn't just notice, they gossiped. "Have you seen Kelechi's new girlfriend? She's stunning," some said. Others whispered, "Poor Aisha, after all she did for him." Aisha saw it all, even when she didn't want to. It was impossible to avoid. The headlines found her. The photos popped up when she was scrolling online, and even strangers in the market talked about it. Every image felt like a fresh wound. It wasn't just that he had moved on, it was how easily he seemed to erase her, replacing years of love and sacrifice with someone who didn't even know the battles they had fought together. But the hardest part? Remembering how he used to look at her the way he now looked at Nomi. That same soft smile, that same public pride. Except now it wasn't hers anymore. And while he was busy parading his new love across the city, Aisha was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had built with both hands, wondering how the man she had once called her soulmate could treat her heart like it was something disposable. When Kelechi walked out, he didn't just take his clothes and his things. He took the life they had built together. The house, once warm with laughter, now felt painfully big. The living room that used to be filled with his booming voice and late-night political debates was now so quiet she could hear the ticking of the wall clock like it was screaming at her. Every room held a memory, and every memory carried a sting. His absence wasn't just in the empty chair at the dining table. It was in the way her eyes automatically looked at the door at 7 p.m., expecting him to walk in, and in the way she still caught herself cooking for two. But what hurt more than the silence were the echoes of his words. "You're a loser. I deserve better." They replayed in her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. Even when she tried to distract herself with chores or work, they found her. She would fold laundry and remember folding his shirts before a big speech. She would open the fridge and remember the time she stayed up cooking his favorite pepper soup when he was sick. There were no children's footsteps to fill the emptiness, no family nearby to sit with her during the long evenings. It was just her, and the heavy truth of how much she had given to a man who had walked away without looking back. She remembered selling her best furniture designs to help him pay for campaign posters. She remembered saying no to big contracts because he wanted her by his side during political rallies. Now those sacrifices seemed like they belonged to another lifetime. The house she had once called a home had become a museum of all the things she had lost. Her dreams, her trust, and the version of herself who believed love meant giving everything without keeping anything for yourself. And in that quiet, she started to wonder if maybe losing him wasn't the worst thing. Maybe losing herself had been. Before Kelechi came into her life, Aisha was a fire that could not be dimmed. She ran a small but thriving interior design firm in Nduola City, creating bold, beautiful spaces that carried her signature style. People trusted her eye for detail. She had clients who booked her months in advance and friends who called her the woman with magic hands. She worked long hours, but it never felt like work, it felt like purpose. Then Kelechi happened. First it felt like love and partnership. He admired her drive, told her she was the kind of woman a man could build a future with. But slowly, without even realizing it, she began to set her dreams aside. She skipped client meetings to attend his campaign launches. She closed her office for weeks to travel with him for political rallies. She told herself it was temporary, that once he was established, she would pick up where she left off. Years passed. His career grew. Hers faded. The business that once had her name buzzing in design circles became just a small memory people occasionally mentioned. And the worst part? She didn't even notice how much of herself she had lost until it was too late. Now, sitting in the same city she once conquered, she couldn't help but ask herself the hard question. Why had she ever shrunk herself for him? She remembered the girl who walked into boardrooms with her head high, who negotiated contracts without flinching, who saw every blank wall as a canvas for something extraordinary. That woman was still inside her, buried under years of sacrifice and silence. It wasn't just about losing a marriage anymore. It was about losing the version of herself who believed she could do anything. And as much as Kelechi's betrayal hurt, it also lit a spark. Because if she had built something once, maybe she could build again. This time not for him, not for us, but for herself. And maybe, just maybe, she could come back even stronger than before. It was close to midnight when Aisha's phone rang. At first she thought it was a wrong number. No one ever called her that late anymore. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to pick up. On the other end was Chika, one of her old clients from years ago. His voice was warm, full of excitement. Aisha, I need you. I'm opening a luxury hotel here in Douala City. It's a massive project, and I trust only you with the design. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her mind went blank. No one had said those words to her in months. I need you. Not out of pity, not because they felt sorry for her, but because they truly believed in her talent. She could almost feel her heart waking up from a long sleep. Chika went on, explaining how he'd followed her work for years, and how her old designs still impressed guests. This place has to be perfect, Aisha. You're the only one who can make it happen, he said with certainty. After the call ended, she just sat there in the quiet, staring at her phone. For months she had been drifting through her days, moving but not really living. And now with one phone call, she felt a tiny spark in her chest, something she hadn't felt since before Kelechi tore her world apart. She opened her sketchbook for the first time in ages. The paper smelled the same, the pencils felt familiar in her hand. She drew a single line, then another, until shapes began to form. She didn't even realize she was smiling. That night, she didn't cry herself to sleep. Instead, she stayed awake, sketching until the early hours of the morning. The pain was still there, but for the first time in a long while, it wasn't the only thing she felt. She had something else now, hope. And that hope was enough to make her believe she could start again. Aisha didn't ease into it. She threw herself into her work like a woman on a mission. The very next morning, her sketchbooks were spread across the dining table. Her laptop open, pencils and fabric samples scattered everywhere. She hadn't felt this kind of energy in years. Every line she drew, every color she picked, carried pieces of her story. Her pain, her strength, her rebirth. She wanted the hotel's spaces to tell a tale, not just of luxury, but of power and resilience. Some nights she worked until her eyes burned. She would sip tea at 3 a.m., scrolling through design inspirations, sketching ideas, and writing down details most people would overlook. The living room that once felt cold and empty was now alive with swatches of velvet, rolls of wallpaper, and mood boards pinned to the walls. She wasn't just designing rooms. She was designing herself back into existence. When Chika came to see her first concepts, he was stunned. Aisha, this is beyond anything I imagined, he said, his voice full of awe. That validation pushed her even harder. She hired assistants, reactivated her business social media pages, and started sharing sneak peeks of her work online. It didn't take long for the city to notice. People began talking. Have you seen what Aisha is working on? Blogs featured her designs, calling them bold and unapologetically African. Former clients started reaching out, asking if she was available for new projects. The same circles that once whispered about her broken marriage were now whispering about her comeback. And every time her phone buzzed with a new inquiry or her name appeared in a magazine, she felt herself growing stronger. She had risen from the ashes not quietly, but with a fire so bright it demanded attention. And though she hadn't planned it, her success was becoming something more. It was a statement, a message to anyone who had ever been counted out, written off, or called a loser. Watch what happens when you decide to rebuild yourself. Kelechi was lounging in his living room when the evening news came on. He wasn't paying much attention until he heard her name. The anchor's voice was cheerful, almost celebratory. Local designer Aisha Karim lands multi-million naira deal for the city's newest luxury hotel. The screen lit up with her face, glowing, confident, dressed in a crisp white blazer that made her look like she owned the world. For a moment he froze, his glass of whiskey halfway to his lips. She didn't look like the woman he had left behind, the one who cried in their kitchen and begged him to listen. No, this Aisha was radiant, steady, and untouchable. The background showed her walking through the hotel lobby, giving instructions to a team of workers, her hands gesturing with authority. Kelechi's jaw tightened. He took a slow sip, but it didn't wash away the sudden dryness in his throat. Nomi, sitting next to him scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. She gave a small smile and said, "Oh, she's pretty," before returning to her feed. Somehow that made it worse. Because in that moment Nomi didn't seem as dazzling as before. Her laughter felt a little too loud, her charm a little too thin. And deep down he knew why. She didn't challenge him. She didn't inspire him. She didn't have that unshakable presence Aisha now carried like armor. As the news clip ended, the reporter's words echoed in his head. Multi-million deal, most sought-after designer, national recognition. Each phrase was a reminder of how wrong he had been. He had called her a loser. Now the whole city was calling her a winner. He set his drink down harder than he intended, the ice clinking sharply against the glass. For the first time, regret wasn't just knocking at his door. It was sitting right next to him, whispering in his ear, reminding him that some mistakes follow you for the rest of your life. The cream-colored envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped under the door by his assistant. Kelechi picked it up without much thought, until he saw the name printed in bold, elegant letters. Grand opening, the Royal Crest Hotel. Lead designer, Aisha Karim. For a second he just stared at it, running his fingers over the embossed gold lettering. He opened it slowly, almost carefully, like it might burn his hands. Inside was a beautifully printed invitation with swirling calligraphy, and the city's crest in gold foil. It was addressed to him personally along with a +1. He told himself it was just a formality. He was still a public figure after all, but something in his chest tightened. That evening, he casually mentioned it to Nomi over dinner. "There's this hotel opening, designed by Aisha. We should go, to show support." His tone was light, but his mind was anything but. He didn't say the real reason, that he wanted to see her, to stand in the same room again, to measure for himself just how much she had changed. Nomi smiled, twirling her pasta. Sure. Sounds fun. She had no idea of the storm quietly brewing in his head. In the days leading up to the event, Kelechi found himself thinking about what he'd wear, how he'd act, what he would say if they spoke. He pictured her reaction. Would she be surprised? Would she still look at him with the softness she once had? Or would she look right through him like he was just another guest? By the time the night arrived, he had convinced himself it was all about support and networking. But deep down, beneath all the excuses, the truth sat heavy. He wasn't going to celebrate her success. He was going to see what he had lost, and maybe, just maybe, to see if there was any way to get it back. The moment Aisha stepped into the event hall, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations paused, glasses hovered mid-air, and all eyes seemed to follow her. She was draped in a stunning golden geli, its folds perfectly wrapped, catching the light like rays of sunrise. Her gown, richly embroidered with intricate patterns, shimmered under the chandeliers as if it had been woven from gold threads. It wasn't just clothing, it was a statement. She walked with an easy grace, not hurried, not hesitant, just steady, as though she owned every inch of the polished marble floor beneath her. Her smile was calm, the kind that came from knowing exactly who she was and no longer needing anyone's validation. It wasn't pride in the shallow sense. It was presence. a quiet power that made people straighten their backs without even realizing it. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Is that Aisha Karim? She looks incredible. Have you seen the designer herself? People weren't just admiring her beauty. They were drawn to her aura, that unshakable confidence she carried like a crown. Kelechi saw her almost instantly. It was impossible not to. His breath caught for a split second, the rest of the room blurring into background noise. She looked different, not because of the gown or the gelly, but because there was a glow in her eyes, a light he hadn't seen in years. And the cruel truth hit him. She had found it after leaving him. Nomi on his arm glanced at Aisha and gave a polite smile, but she could feel the shift in Kelechi's attention. He was staring, and not in the way a man admires a stranger. This was something else, something heavy, regretful. Aisha didn't rush toward anyone. She moved through the room with poise, greeting guests, accepting compliments, making everyone around her feel seen. But whether she meant to or not, her very presence sent one clear message. She had rebuilt herself, and she was no longer the woman he could break. Kelechi had been watching her all evening, rehearsing lines in his head like a nervous schoolboy. Finally, he decided to make his move. Straightening his jacket and forcing a smile, he walked toward her with the kind of confidence that looked good from a distance but felt hollow up close. His steps were slow, measured, as if he was trying to hide the fact that his heart was pounding harder than it had in years. When she turned and saw him, her expression didn't change. No surprise, no warmth, just polite acknowledgement. That alone made him uneasy. He cleared his throat and said, "Aisha, you look different." The words came out softer than he'd planned, almost uncertain. She met his gaze steadily, her voice calm but firm. "I look like myself again." Just 6 words, but they hit like a punch. He swallowed hard, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. Her reply wasn't just about her outfit. It was about everything. She was telling him, without saying it directly, that she had found the version of herself he'd buried under years of neglect and insults. For a moment they just stood there, locked in a silence that felt heavier than the noise of the room around them. The air between them carried everything they weren't saying. Memories of late-night arguments, the sting of cruel words, the warmth of moments that once felt like forever, and the bitter knowledge that those days were gone. He searched her face for a trace of the woman who used to light up when he walked into a room. Instead, he saw someone stronger, someone who no longer needed him, someone who would never again give him the power to define her worth. And that realization made his practiced smile falter just a little. She excused herself first, turning gracefully to greet another guest. Kelechi stood there for a moment watching her walk away, feeling like he had just shaken hands with the past, and realized it no longer belonged to him. Kelechi didn't like the way their last exchange had ended. He waited for a moment when she was alone, then walked back over, this time without the fake charm. His voice was lower, almost hesitant. "Aisha, I need to say something." She looked at him, expression unreadable, and waited. "I didn't mean it when I called you a loser," he began, his tone carrying that mix of guilt and desperation. "I was angry. I said things I shouldn't have. He trailed off, as if hoping she would make it easier for him. But Aisha didn't move, didn't soften. Her eyes stayed locked on his, steady and unblinking. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but the words cut sharper than any shout. "You didn't just call me a loser, Kelechi. You made me believe I was one." He froze. She continued, each word deliberate. "I carried that lie in my heart for months. I looked in the mirror and saw failure because you told me I was one. You didn't just hurt my pride. You made me doubt the woman I'd spent years becoming. But not anymore." There was no anger in her tone, just truth. And that truth was heavier than any insult. Kelechi felt his chest tighten, the weight of her words settling deep. He wanted to tell her he was sorry again, to explain himself, to beg for another chance. But something about her presence told him it was too late. For the first time that night, he truly saw her. Not as the woman he left behind, but as the woman she had become without him. She wasn't his anymore, and she never would be. Aisha gave a polite nod and turned away, her golden gown catching the light as she walked off to greet another guest. Kelechi stood there, his apology hanging in the air, knowing it would never be enough to rewrite what he had done. Nomi stood across the room, champagne glass in hand, pretending to be interested in the conversation around her. But her eyes kept drifting to Kelechi and Aisha. She watched the way he leaned in, the way his words seemed heavy, the way Aisha stood tall and unshaken. There was no mistaking it, this wasn't just a casual chat. This was history, raw and unresolved. When Aisha turned away, leaving Kelechi standing alone, Nomi caught the look on his face. It wasn't the face of a man in control or a man adored. It was the face of someone who had just been reminded of the best thing he ever lost. And suddenly, something inside Nomi shifted. For months she had been the center of his attention, his breath of fresh air, the one he spoiled with dinners, designer gifts, and public displays. She had believed she was special, that she had won. But now, watching from afar, she realized the truth. She hadn't been a victory. She had been a distraction, a temporary escape from a life he had broken with his own hands. The way he looked at Aisha tonight, Nomi knew he had never looked at her like that. Not once. And in that moment she didn't feel triumphant. She felt small. Not because she wasn't beautiful or smart, but because she finally understood that some women are not replaceable, no matter how young, shiny, or glamorous the replacement might seem. Her champagne tasted bitter now. The music felt louder, the room warmer. She suddenly wanted to leave, but when Kelechi returned to her side, she smiled anyway, masking the realization burning in her chest. Because even if she didn't say it out loud, Nomi knew one thing for certain: she wasn't the prize. She was just a chapter in a story that would always belong to someone else. That night, the energy in the room belonged to Aisha. Everywhere she turned, people wanted to shake her hand, take photos, and congratulate her on the stunning hotel design. Her name was on everyone's lips, her smile in every camera flash. She moved with grace and quiet power, speaking to CEOs, politicians, and journalists like she had been born for this moment. And maybe she had, because this was the woman she was always meant to be. Kelechi watched from the corner, feeling strangely out of place. Once upon a time, he had been the center of attention, and Aisha had been the woman standing quietly beside him. Now it was the other way around. She wasn't clinging to him, she wasn't even noticing him. She was in her own world. A world she had built without his money, without his influence, without his name. There was no anger in her face, no trace of the bitterness he had expected, and somehow that made it worse. She had moved on, but not in a way that screamed revenge. No, she had simply outgrown him. She had found herself again, and in doing so, she had become untouchable. Every conversation she had seemed to lift her higher, every compliment another reminder that she didn't just survive, she thrived. People weren't whispering about her heartbreak anymore. They were talking about her brilliance, her vision, her resilience. She wasn't Kelechi's ex-wife. She was Aisha, the designer changing the face of luxury in the city. By the end of the night, the truth was impossible to ignore. The power had shifted completely. The man who once believed she needed him now stood in the shadow of her success. And as she laughed under the warm lights, surrounded by people who respected her, Aisha knew deep down, this was her victory, and she didn't need his applause to feel it. Months later, Kelechi sat in his car late at night, staring at his phone. Her name was still saved in his contacts, Aisha Redheart, a remnant from another life. He hesitated for a long time before finally pressing the call button. It rang and rang until it went to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Nothing. The next day he sent a message. "I just want to talk. Please." Hours passed. No reply. He sent another, longer this time, telling her how proud he was of her, how he had been wrong, how he wanted to make things right. But the little scene mark never appeared. He didn't know that she had long since moved on, not just from him, but from the version of herself that had once waited for his attention. She wasn't ignoring him out of anger. She simply had no space for him in her new life. Her days were full: meetings, interviews, charity events, late-night design sessions. And her heart? It was finally at peace. Kelechi, however, was haunted by the quiet. Every unanswered call, every unread message was like a mirror reflecting the truth. He had underestimated her, broken her, and let her go. And now there was no way back. Sometimes late at night he would see her on TV or in a magazine. She always looked radiant, surrounded by people who celebrated her. And he would remember the woman he once called a loser, the same woman who had become a name the city now applauded. Regret settled heavy in his chest, but it was useless now. The door to her life had closed, sealed by her strength and success. And all he could do was stand on the other side, knocking on a door that would never open again. Aisha never spent a single day plotting how to hurt Kelechi back. She didn't need to. Her focus was on herself, on healing, on building, on finding joy again. She poured her heart into her work, into helping other women rise, and into living a life so full that the past felt like a distant shadow. Her peace was her victory. She woke up every morning with purpose, knowing she had built everything on her own terms. She no longer needed anyone's validation, least of all his. The woman who once doubted her own worth now walked with unshakable confidence, her smile lighting up every room she entered. And Kelechi? He became a walking reminder of a lesson too many men learn too late, that when you break a queen you don't destroy her. You only force her to discover her power. And when she comes back wearing a crown you'll never be allowed to touch. People often asked Aisha if she ever wanted to get even. She would just laugh softly and say, "I already have. I'm happy." Because in the end, the sweetest kind of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's a life so beautiful. It makes the person who once doubted you realize they can never be part of it again.